Hello, my name is Roman Frolov. I am a co-founder of Eternal, which is a new biotech company. In the past, I co-founded a couple of other startups, and in general, I've spent over 6 years in startups, and my background is primarily in software engineering.
Tell us a little bit then about this new project that you're working on.
Of course. So Eternal is a platform for developing immunotherapies against cancer. Essentially, we focus on software solutions, specifically machine learning solutions, that allow improving efficacy and safety of those immunotherapies.
And it's a platform for building that. So will it be something that people can work with, or is it like a project that you specifically will be creating?
Yeah, like B2B, B2C, how does it look?
So essentially the end user are laboratories and research organizations that develop those therapies in labs. And we, as Eternal, we provide the platform, a software solution for them where they can create those therapies.
Okay.
Like essentially model them.
I have no idea how that will look from a UI perspective when I try and imagine that world. But that's beside the point of why we want to talk to you today. Let's start at the top and talk about what sparked though this change from software developer to now biotech. I mean, admittedly you are still developing as a software developer, but there's such a leap of from like cloud. You were working in cloud previously and now into biotech. What sparked that change?
Well, I've actually had a passion for health tech since a long time ago. Not many know that, but back in 2018, I participated in a hackathon in Budapest in a track which had the goal of identifying tumors on MRI DICOM images using either machine learning or computer vision. That was back in 2018, and that was pretty much my first introduction into health tech. And since then, I've looked into it, but I think as many others, health tech looks scary from the outside, and it's complicated. There are regulations and those big pharma companies. And now I basically finally came to a point where I feel comfortable and confident going to that unknown area and applying the knowledge that I have developed over the years of working in software and cloud in this new area. And it happened to be that there is quite a bit of overlap.
Yeah. Tim, what was the name of that German biotech company?
Oh, Biotech.
Biotech.
Yeah, I think so. That's a big. But they invented a COVID vaccine, I think.
There's both things, bio and tech together.
Yeah.
And they're also developing cancer vaccines right now, which are currently in clinical trials.
Wow. Cancer vaccines.
Okay. So are they technically competitors of yours now?
Well, I would love to think of them as partners.
Oh, there you go. Spoken like a true founder.
Developer, diplomat.
All right. So today we wanted to talk about, given your experience through all these fields and your career so far in tech, we wanted to talk about the future of tech and what it might look like, specifically through the lens of some of the boot campers out there, some of maybe the newer people in tech, someone who's maybe in it for a few years. But given it's such an ever-changing landscape, we wanted to dive into your opinion on some of the most important emerging technologies that people should maybe be looking out for. What do you think in the next few years is something people should be keeping an eye on?
Yeah, I'm sorry to sound as a broken radio, but there's this thing that you might have heard of, which is called AI. And, well, it depends on which domain interests you. I would advise to research what are the, let's say, novel tools in that area, which will likely have something to do with machine learning. And like if you are a software engineer, there are lots of co-pilots that help you write code or review your code or write tests, whatever. The code analysis is getting better because of that. And then if you go to other domains, there are lots of applications of machine learning there. For example, those large language models that are based on transformer architecture, they're actually capable of making sense of other sequences than natural language. So, for example, in biotech, there are sequences like DNA or protein sequences, and those also have a certain meaning, but different than in natural language. And those large language models can make sense of it as well and see patterns and predict novel proteins, for example.
It's a vast topic as a beginner to sort of like to hear about. It's an ocean of information, isn't it? With so much innovation happening, how do you think someone decides where to focus, where to kind of to actually look first? Because I mean, even the examples you were giving there about co-pilots when you're writing code or code reviews, there's obviously some bias within the AI itself, or you might think that it might be holding your hand too much. Where do you think someone should start if they are completely new to this topic?
I strongly believe that the starting point should be the fundamentals of computer science, of how computers work, of how networking works, internet, and starting with lower level programming languages is usually beneficial, like starting, for example, with C, so that you get to work with memory and pointers and understand a little bit of how software interacts with the hardware. And then with that solid foundation, it's not, let's say, easy to find your passion, but with that foundation, you can go through different disciplines and try to apply it and see what you actually like. And eventually you will find passion for something.
Oh, you picked C as one of the hardest ones to learn at the beginning. Yeah, start with the hardest one and then work back to the easier thing.
But do you think it's almost, from what you're saying there, it sounds like almost you should kind of not be lured into these emerging technologies if you are just getting into this industry, if you are starting your journey out as a software engineer? Do you think it's like an easy lure just to be like, oh, I'll just turn on Copilot and it can help me with all my pull requests? Or do you think avoid it completely or try and dovetail it in as soon as possible?
Yeah, that's a great point. Personally, you should definitely first understand how a thing works before trying to automate the process. Because if you, let's say, just start writing code and you just accept those suggestions by Copilot, then you'll unlikely to understand what the code does. And then it will accumulate to basically unmaintainable code base. And you definitely don't want that. So even when you receive those suggestions, you need to think critically and review them thoroughly line by line, because they do hallucinate just like other text-based models.
That's the trap, isn't it? If you don't have a fundamental understanding of what it's supposed to be doing, it's very hard to see flaws. And that's not the same as if you produce copy. It's quite easy to see this doesn't sound very human. But especially with these AI generated codes, code bases, there's this thing Cursor now, which allows you just to ask it to create a bunch of different services and then connect them together. And having an understanding of like, oh, okay, I see how you've done this. There's a way more efficient way you could do it, or refactor it in such a way it becomes much more agile. And I do think there's a danger of just blindly listening to everything it says and then diluting the world with awful code, unmaintainable future code, technical debt of the planet. Well, in what other ways, though, do you think that AI is going to affect job roles in tech specifically moving forward? Because I think it's quite clear it's not going to directly replace developers anytime soon. Well,
I think that in general, software engineering is much more than programming alone. So like the coding part is rather, let's say, a minor or smaller part of the job of a software engineer. As by that I mean like the coding part, where you actually put some code into the editor. What takes a lot more time usually is designing and building those architectures, brainstorming with the team, cooperating, planning. All of that takes quite a bit of time. All the code reviews, all the design document reviews, those are necessary parts of the software engineering process as, well, you build something in a collaborative environment that has to be maintained over a long period of time, years or sometimes decades. So that part takes quite a while. Like coding is really usually like a smaller part of the job.
That's quite. I was going to say that's quite a mind-blowing statement, I think, for maybe junior developers who are learning to code. Because I think that when you're doing a boot camp, the feeling you get is, you're writing like buckets of code a day, but maybe, well, as you just said, and as I can attest to, when you are working as a developer, that certainly isn't the case. There's a lot of measuring twice and cutting once, as you might say.
So what's the expression? A day of planning save you 2 weeks of coding? Is it something like that? It's been a while since.
Something along those lines. But in general, it does progress with the level of seniority. So usually developers start by producing a lot of code and deleting very few lines, and end up adding very few lines and deleting a lot of code.
Yeah, that's a better way to get that on a t-shirt.
Yeah,
I remember.
Go on, Dan.
I was going to say, I remember code reviews were the most fun part. You'd write like in solitude, and then you'd go through it with a senior and get everything nicer. It was my favorite part.
And it's also an amazing way to share knowledge.
That's what I was trying. That's a much more elegant way of saying it was a good learning experience.
So yeah, to bring it back to your current venture in the world of bio and tech, how does AI play a role there? And how are you applying it day to day?
Well, essentially, there's a lot of biological data out there, which is, let's say, quite computationally expensive to parse without using machine learning models. And now with the recent advancements, now the scientists are able to finally understand certain biological processes, notice patterns, identify new targets for drug development. And there are really many applications of different types of architectures, not only the large language models that I mentioned earlier. So there are many use cases, and we'll probably discover even more as the time progresses. There are many papers being published all the time on novel use cases that were unlocked by machine learning.
And just to sort of, maybe is for beginners out there and me, what would you say the difference between in the use cases you're saying, the sort of the machine learning and the AI part? Do you separate them at all, or is it the kind of?
In general, I try to avoid the term AI because it's being used for everything these days. I just try to think about machine learning and more specific types of models when applicable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I try not to use the term AI that much so that they don't have me tracked when the uprising comes, It's very polite to the LLMs.
You always have to say thank you at the end of your ChatGPT conversations, otherwise
you genuinely do that, I think, still.
Yeah, I always say thank you, just in case.
I'm certainly not rude. I only use it for very professional. I'm certainly not rude to it. There's no, I don't say thank you. I don't say thank you. I never.
Do you at least capitalize your letters?
Yeah, exactly. Do that, but I don't thank you. I never criticize it though. Like that's not good enough. But I just move on. Really,
you deserve to be living in a computer, stuff like that.
Yeah. All right. With all this in mind, about the way things have changed, and without all these powerful new tools, what advice would you have for people now moving into tech? Certainly moving forward, what kind of things do people need to be thinking about to progress in the career in the current state of the world?
I'll answer it from a perspective of hiring manager. Essentially, we already mentioned the importance of the fundamental skills, let's say hard skills in software engineering roles. I will also want to mention some other skills, like learning agility, ability to adapt and perceive new information, seek new information. That's also an important skill to have. the emotional intelligence, ability to handle stress, resolve conflict, because at the end of the day, you still work with humans. The ability to handle critical feedback and provide critical feedback, which also, in general, requires good communication skills. And we do interact a lot, both verbally and written, when developing software. So communication skills do play a paramount role in that sense.
Do you think it's harder to receive critical feedback or give critical feedback?
I think it can be hard to give critical feedback in a balanced way. I think many people can give critical feedback, but they might sound threatening or demoralizing, and you have to find a balance. You need to be able to see both positives and negatives and communicate them in a fashion that will not put too much blame on a person, yet will provide clear guidelines on how to improve.
Yeah, I think as a junior, that's probably one of the hardest pieces of the puzzle to navigate, isn't it? How when you ask for feedback or getting feedback during review sessions, how often those are. But as a manager, as I can imagine it's also very, very difficult to kind of put that across in a constructive way.
Sometimes providing critical feedback can be hard. For those who seek feedback, though, there is one trick that when you ask for feedback instead of receiving it unexpectedly, you usually handle it better. So instead of waiting for someone to give you feedback, be proactive. Just say, I would appreciate critical feedback, or critical feedback is much appreciated. That way you are already prepared to receive it, and when you receive something critical, it probably won't hurt that much.
Yeah, there's this sanctity of the code, isn't there? People getting attached to their code. I've written these lines, don't criticize them, this is how I write them.
Well, you know what, as well, I've noticed, Roman, in a couple of ways that we've interacted before, that I thought was really cool, was we were doing a presentation together, actually, at a meetup, Dan's meetup. And even though I was very much the junior presenter in that scenario, as soon as we finished, you messaged me and said, oh, I'd love to hear some critical feedback. And I thought that was really cool. And we had a conversation about it as well afterwards, because I asked the same. And then another thing that I was going to ask, which is quite interesting, is I noticed as well in the past you've had, like, on your profiles on Slack and things, links to a Google form where people can give you feedback. Is that something that you'd advocate for? Is that a useful?
Yeah, I think especially if you're a manager, sometimes people might simply be afraid to criticize you in private chats. So having an anonymized form can be helpful for those who don't feel comfortable talking to you directly.
Very cool. I like that.
Yeah, that's a really good way for people to continue kind of growing into their if once they've mastered the art of taking critical feedback, then asking for it proactively is a great way to continue to grow. What other ways, though, do you think people can stand out? Specifically, if people are trying to stand out and get ahead and keep up with modern technologies once they've landed that first role, do you think just focusing on new technologies is the best way to do that?
I think developing and investing in your brand is something that can help you stand out tremendously on the current job market. A lot of professionals use LinkedIn these days. So if you put your achievements on your profile, describe yourself, like who you are as a person in the about section, so that recruiters know what your culture is like, and then you post, let's say regularly, you appear to your network, and you might also talk about some topic that interests you. Thus, you will both refresh your knowledge or gain new knowledge and form new connections on a relevant topic in a relevant domain that might end up helping you get a job in the field.
I think it also helps you just remember that you're not existing in a vacuum. It might be kind of scary to go on LinkedIn and post things and interact and be that person, but that is I mean, it's not real life, but it's like a version of like a job market that you are going to have to experience, and the competition and noise and all that kind of thing. So it is a valid way through.
It's like a preview. You get a preview of what the work environment will be like. And yeah, definitely, it's always more comfortable to stay, let's say, somewhat isolated. I can say it as a startup founder. Like sometimes you just want to build your product without talking to anyone because you know it best. But the earlier you will get critical feedback, the better.
Okay, so just to round things off, we've talked about this, the emerging technologies, how people can kind of start their path. How do you think people can showcase their skills and achievements to get noticed? As opposed to just posting on LinkedIn, or they might not have much to post in their bio section on there. Is there anything like tangible skills based that people can do to show off to potential employers?
Yeah, depending on your specialty. Let's say if you're a software engineer, then the obvious choice would be GitHub, where you can publish your code in open source or contribute to open source projects. Like if you contribute to, let's say, to like a Linux core or Node.js, will look interesting on your resume. Something I definitely paid attention to when I was screening resumes. Then if you are a designer, then you can go to Behance and publish your work there. If you are into machine learning, when there is Kaggle with competitions, and there is Hugging Face, where you can again publish your models into open source. And then when somebody discovers it, you might either find fellow engineers that you can potentially build a project together, or an employer will see you and offer you a job.
And just to sort of go back across those points, and something you mentioned earlier that kind of also might touch into this area as well. Hackathons. You mentioned you've partaken in a hackathon before, and that was kind of your first taste of the biotech world. And we were talking last week to Zoe, and she had a lot to say about hackathons. Do you think that's something? Is it a valid way of standing out and kind of getting stuck into your career as a junior?
I don't really know how much it helps you to stand out in terms of, let's say, publicity. It definitely helps you gain certain skills. Like you have to build a team, then you have to figure out a design, build a prototype, iterate really fast, because hackathons are usually like 1 or 2 days long. And then you have a chance to essentially detach from whatever you're building at work or studying and actually try something new, some new area. And for example, one of the hackathons that we won, it ended up becoming our first startup in the electric vehicle charging market.